I get goosebumps when I share this story, Alan. It just goes to the fact that these folks really cared about what they did. After doing surveys of what matters in this field, the summary was, we just have to be nice. It was mind-boggling. That had to be said. I still feel like I'm in the honeymoon phase. 8 years into the business, I'm as excited as I was on day one.
Welcome to the Franchise Champion Show. I'm Alan Regala, former D1 athlete, Stanford engineer, and franchise owner who built a multi-million-dollar exit. I created this show to help driven individuals like you find the right franchise and learn how to build wealth and reclaim your time. My guest today also left a successful engineering career, not because he had to, but because something personal pointed him toward a different kind of work. He's now 8 years into building his Assisting Hands home care franchise in the Boston area, and what he's building is worth paying attention to. Dave Tasto, welcome to the Franchise Champion Show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you. This is definitely a space I love and is growing every day. But before we get into the franchise business, tell us a bit about how you got into franchising. What your career looked like before that.
Sure, I'll try to keep it as short as possible. No, I had an amazing experience with some caregivers that helped my grandmother. Before that, though, my wife and I had always wanted to start a business of our own. But, after a few decades or a couple decades in the corporate America, while still having an eye on doing something for ourselves and another eye on growing in the corporate world, up the corporate ladder, we hadn't found something that really kind of pulled our heartstrings or we were passionate about until that experience with my grandmother. And my grandmother, the story is my grandmother moved in with my mom and stepdad. They cared for her for a while, but as the disease, unfortunately, she had dementia, and as the disease progressed, it became harder and harder for them to care for her at home. Eventually, my grandmother moved into a community, and eventually into the memory area of a community. Towards the end, she did need some support through hospice, and it was these hospice aides that blew my mom away. I grew up in Minnesota. My mom would call me from Minnesota and share how these aides were going above and beyond, treating my grandmother with the respect, the dignity that she deserved, and probably making a difficult time for her manageable, I would say. My grandmother just went on hospice, and so it's probably just more manageable is what you could probably say. But my mom had actually mentioned at one point, if there were aides that she knew of like this, she could have kept mom at home longer. And of course, these things, got me thinking about what's out there. And the fact that she was so touched and spoke so highly of these folks also got me thinking about what's out there. What is the real need for this kind of care or this kind of support for the many and many folks that are nearing this time in their lives with the baby boomers and so forth. And, I always thought about what there would be out there, but what really tipped me to this field was I actually got a chance to meet those caregivers during, that hospice period. I went back out to Minnesota and actually met them at my grandmother's wake before the funeral. Wow. She, they told stories on what they were doing, and how they were going above and beyond, as my mom had said, and they shared stories on how they were doing the AM routine, as we call it now. And now that I'm a veteran in the field, I feel. Yeah. They painted her fingernails, basically curled her hair, did all this extra stuff. When they had the AM routine is basically just, getting her showered, dressed, and ready for breakfast. Yeah. And to do this kind of stuff is just meant a lot for my mom. One of the aides even shared a story on how her grandmother was going through a similar situation with dementia. She ended up trading blouses between her grandmother and my grandmother, and she said, "Your grandmother," and I remember her doing this and holding the collar of her own shirt, sharing that, my grandmother was happy to be wearing her favorite new blouse. I get goosebumps when I share this story, Alan. It's just. It goes to the fact that, these folks really cared about what they did. How I got into franchising after that, I came back.
That just, you would know better than I, but that sounds like, such great care and attention to someone in such a vulnerable state that, it seems unusual. And I'm not in this industry, so, I don't have a point of reference, but I would imagine that this is just an unusually high level of care, of attention to to the person that they're caring for this industry. I don't know. Is that true?
In fact, as much as it was just out of this world for me, and learning about it, there are so many folks in this field, in this industry, that are in it for the right reasons. They, grew up caring, during their youth or, in their teens or early 20s, they were caring for a grandmother themselves, and they just got back into this field because, the quote I heard from one of our applicants that came into our office, I feel good making people smile. Like this stuff is just, there are a lot of folks out there that are doing this amazing level of care, and you got to find them.
That's great. That's awesome. So awesome. Okay, so what happened after this experience that you had?
I came back we were on the airplane coming back from Minnesota, and I just, was like, hey, what do we do? How do, asking my wife, how do we use our resources, our assets, and our experience? We both got MBAs along the way. And so I started researching as an engineer would do, looking into various fields, different industries myself. And my wife and I were driving in our neighborhood, and we saw a sign for a franchise show. And and she's like, if you're going to go into business, you got to at least go to this franchise show. And I remember looking at her and I said, well, hey, wait, I'm leaving the corporate world to not have another boss, right? And so, right. Huge irony here now. I'm full tilt in it, but I ended up going, heeding the great advice from my wife.
Probably a good idea.
I met some folks, that knew a lot about franchising. Some folks just like yourself, Alan. I went through a process of evaluating other brands, but I also met some folks from Assisting Hands at that same show and continue evaluating what it would be like, owning an Assisting Hands home care. And so I continue that evaluation, but I was excited, to continue that broader evaluation of other brands. We sat down with this person explaining my wife's and I personal goals, our objectives, what we've achieved so far through our career, but where we could still look to grow. And we're presented some great brands, some different options that we would have never considered on our own or through our own research. So that was helpful. What it ended up doing for us was really opening our lens. Before we did decide to narrow it back in on what we really were passionate about. And as I was continuing that evaluation of Assisting Hands, I knew that my heart was pulling in that direction and that I wanted to make a difference directly in people's lives. And so we continued. After, though, I said, hey, the senior care thing is really right. I did then explore other brands in this space and really looked at what there is, how the brands compare to themselves, what it is about them or that's unique to Assisting Hands. And I did find a lot of great things about Assisting Hands that, brought me in. And now I'm full tilt. I'm excited, happy. I still feel like I'm in the honeymoon phase. 8 years into business, I'm as excited as I was on day one.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Okay, well, before we get any further here, tell us exactly what Assisting Hands Home Care does.
We provide non-medical care for folks who want to age in place, live their retirement, where they would like to, or for folks who need a bit of extra help after a surgery or a transition in life. Say something happens to end up in the hospital and they're coming back home and they need a little bit of support while they're doing rehab at home or other types of, healthcare related, conditions that they need to get through. We can help them with daily tasks. And I say non-medical, not, our caregivers are certified nursing assistants or certified home health aides, folks who have the training experience. But medical care in our field refers to mostly skilled nurses, or like RNs or LPNs, or therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. So we fall into the non-medical, helping with daily needs. Basically, we call it ADL support, which is activities of daily living. And that can include, as I mentioned for my grandmother, the bathing, the dressing. It could be feeding if some folks need that type of support, as well as just transfers in the home, help with ambulation or walking around, but as well, taking them to appointments, follow-up appointments. and getting around town to go get groceries or other types of things that they need to kind of function where they would like to, week to week, day to day, so forth.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great, important service that you guys are providing to people out there. Obviously, seniors, as well as other people that may be recovering from a surgery or something like that. But tell us about this industry. I've heard some different statistics here, but tell us about the size of this industry and how many people are entering, this like, what do they call it? Silver tsunami?
Yeah, it is a silver tsunami. I'm not, perfect with statistics, but I think it's like, every day or week or something like that, there's like 10,000 folks or, seniors, retiring or getting into a spot where right now, I think most of them are in their 70s or getting into their 70s where they just start needing care or assistance at home. And so we aren't at the peak of the need or the demand curve. We're still even at the beginning of the demand curve for folks that are going to need this type of support at home.
Yeah.
What drew me, Alan, as well is it's where I would like to get support, right? I'd like to live my retirement or as long as I could possibly stay in my own home. And 9 out of 10 folks are looking to do the same.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my parents are in their 80s, and we just moved them to a 1-story house from a 2-story house they were at before. And yeah, I mean, that's where they want to be. They don't want to go to a home or I guess a facility. They want to live in their new home, for as long as possible, which is just like a couple blocks from my brother's house. And so, when the time comes, I know that's going to be the answer is, for them to get some help in their home because they don't want to, that's where they're comfortable. Yeah, that's amazing. So, you had left the corporate world for this. Like, tell us about that transition. I mean, was that scary for you? Or were you just like so zoned in and knew what you wanted to do that, you weren't thinking about that at all?
No, I did do a bunch of research, evaluated a ton of things while I still had that senior director job in the corporate world. And it was, a well thought out decision to kind of decide to move on. The security that you have. In the end, though, it came down to what I felt was right. And as much as I'm analytical and my wife had a technical background as well, it has to feel right. It's got to be in your heart. It's got to be what you want to do, that you're going to be passionate about. That helps a lot. All businesses have ups and downs, but what powers you through is a lot of times that passion, that perseverance, that you really care about what you're doing and you want to make a difference. But I ended up just basically resigning, and jumping in full tilt, weeks after I resigned. And I did as much as I could to kind of get things in order as I could before signing on with Assisting Hands. But within weeks, I was down getting training and off to the races.
That's awesome. Okay, so you were super zoned in on this new business, no regrets, no looking back, just head down, moving forward. What was that first year like? You're 8 years into it now, but like if you can put yourself back in those days, what was that first year like for you? Initially,
it was a lot of tasks. Getting out of the corporate world, I was a senior director in program management, and I felt like I wasn't doing anything on any given day. I was delegating everything, assigning actions, following up. This is the corporate world, right? And so I didn't feel like I was, accomplishing much in the corporate world. But every day I could cross things off my list. And there's a lot of little things that are needed to start any kind of business. And you have to be diligent about a lot of those things, setting up your business entities, through legal help or other types of aspects related to just nuts and bolts, getting a phone system set up, getting a payroll company, that you want to work with, some of the partners, all those little things. With a franchise, there's a recommended vendors and providers that can tackle all this for you. And there's a list of all of the things that we have to get done before we move into, opening our business. But initially, it was just a lot of tasks, but boy, was I energized to get these things done. And it was exciting, choosing some of the office furniture, things like that this is what's going to be my baby that I was going to be setting up and operating out of. And what did my office want to look like? These were exciting times, even though it was tasks, that I had to get done and do, because it was just me, right? It was just me in the beginning. And so shortly after that, though, that first year kind of progressing into the year after we did open, I hired two other full-time folks to help me in the office. One helped run more of the day-to-day and hire caregivers for our team. Another was a person who had more of a clinical background, coming in from a field that wasn't in healthcare. I wanted to bolster, the team that we had to kind of make sure we could take on cases and do right by all of our clients. So I hired a clinical person to join us in the office. As that year progressed, I was able to work, instead of doing those tasks, I would work in an area, make sure that our new hire orientation had my stamp on it, kind of my values and what we were bringing to the table in terms of these new employees that we're bringing on, how we were going to go about, and also, similar to the story I shared with you, the why we're doing what we're doing. In fact, even to today, I have a picture of my grandmother up on the office up on the wall in our office, and with the words compassion next to it, and it's really a reminder of what those caregivers did for her that really turned me into this field. As each of these areas of the business were able to get kind of set up and start operating, I was focused on the marketing. That was an interest of mine, building relationships and connections in the community, working on obtaining those client referrals from partners, from families, or so forth in the community. And I found myself delegating more after that first year, getting into the second year, but knowing that things were under control with someone I trusted. And I have to say, though, as much as I delegated a ton when I was in the corporate world, I had to relearn how to delegate. I say it was my baby, right?
Yeah.
And you need to build trust with the folks that you're bringing into your office. And the office in any business, the office team that you have are such critical hires, because they're the folks that you can leverage their experience, and they're going to also have a stamp on your business because they're your first hires, And I'm very excited to get going in that first year and a half, and progress from nothing to something. I remember starting up the first case that we had. And before I started, there was who would have taken on this case? Now we're helping a family.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. And, it's cool to hear you talk about the first year, and you kind of, lit up about completing all these tasks and getting stuff done, and think about office furniture and all those little things. I think a lot of people in the corporate world get nervous, scared, leaving their secure job, in corporate, and it's just going to be a lot of work, right? Which it is. But I think, like you just said, it's when it's your own thing, when it's your own business and you're doing it for you, like, it is exciting. It's really cool. There are a lot of things, especially that first 12, 18 months, first couple of years, it's going to be more difficult, but because you're doing it for you, it doesn't feel the same. It's not that same, 60 hours you're working for yourself is different than working those same hours for someone else. Would you agree with that?
Completely. And it's a flexible. I could get up at 6 a.m. because that's when I woke up. I could get a couple hours done before my kids awoke and would still walk them to the bus stop. And so as much as I might have been putting in those 60 hours or more, the first year or so, it was 100% flexible. I could do what I did when I wanted to. And that was, something I didn't expect, even to have that flexibility early on in the business. I was the boss, right? So I was the owner.
Absolutely. You're working around your schedule, working around, what make it what you want it to be. That's the beauty of being your own boss. I love it. Quick pause. Dave went from director at a consumer products company to caring for families. And it works because the fit was right. That's the whole game. Finding the opportunity that actually matches who you are. That's what I help people do, and there's no cost to you. Learn more at athlete2owner.com. All right, back to Dave. So, you started off, it was just you're doing everything. Slowly you're starting to build this team. You got someone that's hiring people, clinical person, and you're building your staff of caregivers. what does that team look like today, 8 years later?
I think we probably have almost just under a dozen folks in our office now.
Wow.
And some are part-time, per diem. Some we have multiple nurses that are helping out. Folks that are focusing on their own areas, driving their own metrics, their KPIs. Specifically, I'm working to help grow Assisting Hands, and I want to know that delegating some of these tasks are being taken care of. That allows me the freedom and flexibility to step a little bit more out of the day-to-day and trust that they're getting their role or their job completed within the team, and that all these metrics or KPIs do ladder up to what we need to support the business. The recruiter has, their metrics and what they're going after, not just the hires that we're putting on new cases, but the leading indicators, the number of applications, things like that kind of drive the results, and some of this structure isn't, overbearing. It's the right size for a business our size. But we have over 110 caregivers.
Wow.
Working in the field.
Wow. So let's talk about that, because, I've heard that, caregivers is finding and retaining good caregivers seems to be a challenge for in-home care companies. And, you came into this because of the caregivers that you had experienced for your grandma. And so I'm curious to know kind of what that experience is like for you in finding the right people and also retaining them with the high quality of standard that you have, from your experience.
One thing that stood out to me, just about the same time I was starting this business, I saw a TED Talk or heard of a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. People buy why you do what you do and not what you do. And that just resonates. And so
start with why.
Sharing my why, with our new hires, even the caregivers that are joining our team to help, they want to be part of something, making a difference. That's the folks I talked about earlier that are in this field for the right reason. And it comes back to, are you treating them like you would treat your own family? It sounds cliche, it sounds basic, but when other folks in this industry are in it, some folks are, some offices or agencies are getting purchased by private equity firms, and they're focused on different things than just the care and having the right care model in place and what families do need at this time in their life and things like that. When you lose track of that stuff, then things can go off the rails. If we just keep our focus in on what really matters, that's going to make the difference. And treating your employees the way you would want to be treated yourself is going to retain them, right? I remember going to a conference and heard some other home care executives, and not even other business owners, but industry leaders, consultants, and after doing surveys of what matters in this field, the summary was we just have to be nice. Mind-boggling that had to be said.
Yeah.
But you're going above and beyond and, delighting your team, recognizing and rewarding them. You differentiate in your local market when other folks are trying hard to just be nice, right? It's just, come on.
Wow, that's crazy. It's mind-blowing. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I went to a training for another franchise brand, and their words of wisdom for same thing, hiring, maintaining, retaining good employees was 3 words. It was treat them well. So yours is better, there's only 2 words. Same thing. Wow. That's incredible. I mean, it makes so much sense. You just think this is so obvious for anyone that has any kind of empathy. But I think that's, like you said, when you're not focused on the right things, it's easy to get sidetracked and you're looking at other things like the numbers, the lagging indicators, instead of focusing on the people in your team.
And the industry is a local industry. It's a small, connected with a lot of the same folks working as caregivers. A lot of the caregivers have friends in the industry, and word spreads. So if you do treat them well, and you do take care of your team, one of our number one referral sources is right now our own team.
That's awesome. That says a lot.
Take care of them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned when we spoke last that you wrote a book. during the pandemic. Tell us about that.
Well, when we weren't able to get out and do marketing, we had to do more of these types of conversations with folks. I had a lot of exciting, coming into this field from the outside, just, wanted to learn more, did a lot of research, learn more about what really matters. And I was, noodling what it was going to be beyond the kind of standards that Assisting Hands has in terms of the professional caregiving that we drive and the satisfaction we drive. But what were my office, going to really be known for? What is it going to be our focus, our guiding light, principle? And I wanted something to be measurable. Again, probably the engineer in me, making sure that, we can measure it, because what gets measured, gets managed. And a bunch of different, research. I came to preventing hospitalizations. And this was in late 2019, and trying to figure out what this was going to really be about my business. I knew that, and as I did more of that research, the Affordable Care Act was penalizing hospitals, and still is, for readmissions after a certain amount of time. If an individual goes back to the hospital for the same reason, within 30 days, the hospital doesn't get fully reimbursed for the previous visit. Well, again, I learned that those metrics flow down to rehabs. A hospital wants to refer to a rehab that will not let their patients come back to the hospital, right? Takes care of them, sends them home with a proper discharge and so forth. But then the rehab is also discharging to a home health, the skilled care companies that I was talking about, the VNA or visiting nurse or therapy that gets done in the home. Same thing. If you're a rehab, you want to make sure that who you're referring out to is going to keep them at home and not let them go back, or not allow them to decline, or what would cause a readmission. And again, same thing down to home care, right? It kind of flows downhill from the hospital, those requirements or the objectives to keep people at home. But I was talking to families, I was talking to other clinicians. Individuals don't want to go back to the hospital. They don't want to go to the hospital in the first place.
Right.
No family member wants their loved one to go to the hospital. And our caregivers, if our clients go to the hospital, our caregivers lose hours. Then our office team, we have case managers that go out, nurses or whatever, that would do assessments, build an amazing care plan that addresses the cause for hospitalizations, right? But if for some reason that client did end up going back in, it's disheartening. It doesn't drive satisfaction in your office team, because they built this big plan. We scheduled all of our office team to scheduling, readjusting some caregiver schedules to make sure that we can meet that family's needs. And then if they go to the hospital, all of that unravels, and we have to reassign caregivers to different cases. The care plan is probably going to need to be changed when that person eventually comes back out of the hospital. So it just drives more work if we could prevent it, all the better for everybody. So I was looking into this and realized, though, that if we were really, as a company, going to tackle readmissions, we needed to work with family caregivers. There in the U.S., family caregivers are doing the lion's share of caregiving. And even if we come into a home and work from 9 to 5 with a trained caregiver, if our client, say 9 to 5, and the client, is working with a family member, a son or a daughter, covers the evenings, getting them to bed, but our client falls at 6 o'clock, they're still going to the hospital, despite our efforts, our training, everything else we could be doing. And so I realized that the book, is written for family caregivers. It's written by a non-clinician. It's to do the things that our team does to help keep people out of the hospital. And that kind of helped me focus on, preventing the first trip to the hospital, which is often related to household safety or falls. And then there's top 4 chronic conditions that really are the key drivers for readmissions. And some of our clients have 2 of these chronic conditions, comorbidities, as they say. And so there's a lot that family members can do. They don't have to be registered nurses. They just need to know what to look out for, what needs escalation. And if they're communicating with us and we can communicate, or they're calling the primary care because they know what to escalate for, we're going to partner in keeping their loved one out of the hospital. And that's the impetus for the book called Thriving at Home. It's in the back here. Thriving at Home, a handbook for preventing hospital stays, was really written for those family caregivers. The backdrop of the timeline while I started working on the book was in, maybe early 2020. Just after I thought about, aligning my business operations and everything we do about preventing hospitalizations, the pandemic hit, and a third of my clients went on pause. And that was some head scratching. Like a year and a half into the business, and this hits you.
Yikes!
But their care needs didn't go away. Right?
Yeah.
And most of them were for, just like light care, some support around the home, making meals, things like that. Many of the patients that needed more support at home still continued on with us, and nothing changed. But after a few months, though, some of those families were thrown in the white towels and, we need help. We can't do this by ourselves. And they called us back in. Others, though, during the pandemic, we heard of loved ones going to the hospital for things they could have prevented. And, an escalating, blood sugar that's going too high, but if, and not to fault any of these families, going to the hospital during the pandemic was definitely something that was, a big concern, especially in the early days of the pandemic. So understood, but there could have been a call to the primary, and not a rush to the ER, but a call to the primary care before the blood sugars got way out of whack. And they did have to go, for example, to the hospital. But this timing confirmed, what was going on at the time confirmed with me that we had to work with family members. And now the book is intended to inform and educate as much as possible so that we can be partners in the care for their loved ones.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes so much sense thinking about, your clients, your patient, the patient care from a holistic standpoint, not just your portion of it for when your people are there, but trying to help them as a whole, and which means helping the uneducated potential family members that just don't know what they don't know, helping them to keep their loved ones safe when they're in the charge. It makes so much sense. So how I'm curious, like how does that work? How do you use the book? Is this something that you provide or you recommend to each of the families that you work with? What is that like?
We give it out to all families that we start up care with. And so it's, I'm not trying to make money as an author. I'm more trying to give back and help people live their retirement if they want to. And we just give out a copy of the book to all the families we start up care with, basically as a gesture to show them that we're really committed to helping keep their loved one out of the hospital, but also looking to partner with them on what we can do, not to take over for them, or if it's needed, we do need to take over in some cases, but to kind of work with them on what's best for their loved one.
I love it. That's fantastic. And man, it's got to be a big differentiator for you and your specific, franchise business that I'm sure not many other people have. With your founder.
1 in 5 non-medical agencies like ours even tracks readmissions, is what my research showed. And so right then, as soon as we start tracking our admission rates or readmission rates, we're already differentiating just by tracking. But the fact that we build care plans that help address previous hospitalizations, we actually offer a Thriving at Home certification training for our aides to help, reinforce the things that they've learned going through CNA, education courses and so forth, but reinforcing and what they can do to keep their clients, again, it matters to them as well, out of the hospital.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Very, very cool. What would you tell someone who's sitting where you were sitting, 8-10 years ago, someone who is thinking about doing something else, wanting to kind of be in charge of your own destiny, but, maybe they're still a little bit, they have some concerns about leaving their secure job, but they're exploring options. What kind of recommendations do you have for someone who's considering that?
Do find something that's you're passionate about, you really care about. I think I was sharing earlier, there's always ups and downs, but if it's more than just a job to you, that's going to keep you invested, committed, and carry you through those tough times in any business, whether it's growing pains and you're busting at the seams and you need to get through this next thing until things get better, or, a tough time, a setback that you might face in a business, which it happens. I mean, hopefully there's no more pandemics hitting, but that was a setback, or at least it felt like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Yeah, I think find something that you truly care about.
Yeah, I love it. All right, last question for you. Speaking of getting through the tough times, being a business owner, franchise owner requires some amount of grit. And we all develop in different areas. I'm curious to know, for you, where did you develop your grit?
Something that comes to mind from when I was growing up, a long time ago, it may seem, but I grew up on a farm in southwest Minnesota. And when I was about 8, my parents went bankrupt off of the family farm. We moved to another town. My mom was a teacher. She started teaching again while my dad went back to school to try to get into a different field. But that experience, how I saw them reinvent themselves, or what was going to be their career at the time. My mom was passionate about what she was doing. My dad was just as passionate about farming and kind of moving on, but then they persevered, and I feel like when you say grit, and I love that word, and I've looked into it and thought a lot about it, what comes to mind to describe grit to me is passion and perseverance. Like, basically, with those two things, you have grit, and I'm trying to instill grit, if you can do such a thing, with my kids. Yep. Basically, as a dad, what can I do? But it was a tough time moving off the farm, and becoming a city slicker was the term at the time. Big changes to our family. We moved to an area that we didn't have any other close relatives in, but it's where we could get back on our feet again. And knowing that there's green grass wherever you look, and you can turn lemons into lemonade, I think is a big piece of it. So just maybe part of the optimism behind it, and kind of keep persevering. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you for sharing that story. I feel like grit is such an important part of business ownership, because there are going to be tough times, and I feel like anyone who's ever said, I grew up on a farm, somehow that automatically the checks the box for grit somehow, because of all the work, all the hard work and early mornings and all that other stuff that is required to be on a farm, first of all. And I guess when you combine farm with bankruptcy, that's like a couple notches, higher for grit even. But to be able to survive that, and to, or watch your parents survive and your whole family, get through that, that instills a lot of grit, I think, into your character. And, you mentioned trying to instill that in your kids. Same here, try to do the same for mine. It's one of those interesting things, though, because, you want to give them, as much as you can as a parent, but at the same time, you want them to have some amount of struggle in something to be able to develop that grit. Because if everything's easy, then that grit doesn't get developed, right? So that's a challenge for all the parents out there that are doing well off, which that's why I think sports is a great thing too, because, that's an area where they can be challenged, and they can be forced, or they can fail, be allowed to fail, and experience that, that kind of development through without, having to go through a bankruptcy, I guess, or live on a farm. But
across it in college, and loved that time, that camaraderie with the team. And you said, you're right, we've had tough games, we've had great wins, but you do see that you can move on. So you're right, in sports is a big analogy of that. Yeah, love it. Well, thank you, Dave, so much for joining me today, sharing your wealth of knowledge, and congratulations on being a franchise champion. Thank you very much, Alan.
Home care isn't the first industry most engineers think about, but for Dave, it was the perfect match. And that's exactly the point. The best franchise decisions aren't about chasing what's hot. They're about finding something you can go all in on. If you're in a corporate role and that spark is missing, I can help you find your version of what Dave built. I work with driven professionals to cut through the noise and find the franchise that fits your goals, your capital, and your life at no cost to you. Book a quick intro call through the link in the show notes or go to athletetoowner.com/ready. I'm Alan Regala, helping you become a franchise champion. See you in the next one.